It's the Draft Fellows coming at you live. Kyle and Andrew breaking down the drive. Prospects to roster, we got the flow. First round picks to the ones you don't know. Talk about the combine, skills on display. Who's rising up and who's falling away. Roster building like a GM in the zone. Kyle, Fellows, Andrew Mertig, they own the phone.
Hey, welcome back to the Draft Fellows podcast. I am Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows. And together we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure you're checking us out on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. This has been a good night. It is late here. Andrew and I, for our listeners, we have a little bit of a time discrepancy. Andrew's on the West Coast. I'm on Eastern time. So we are recording about, what is it? I guess it's 10:15. This is pretty early for us, actually. But I do miss the days when Andrew lived on Central Time Zone because that made recording a little bit easier. But Andrew, this is just kind of springing this on you. Is there anything that you miss about the Midwest?
Yeah, there's tons. The cost of living. Sometimes the changing of seasons every once in a while, but not right now because
not right now.
In
Yeah,
single digits in
that's
Wisconsin.
Good.
So the 50s here, which feels cold to the locals, is not so bad. But no, I mean there's a lot of things with food. Sometimes the people, but overall, it's pretty outstanding to live here and still get to visit the Midwest.
That's good. And I selfishly do wish that Andrew was back in the Midwest because that would help me out with the time change. But most days I'm jealous of where I know that he gets to live in a little bit more of a temperate climate and not freezing like we are currently in the Midwest. But we won't make Andrew do a top 25 list of the things he misses from the Midwest. We are on the show today going to go through Andrew's top 25 draft prospects from the 2025 cycle that is upcoming. This is early in the process, we're just putting the end of the 2024 college football season is coming to a close. We're moving into a little bit more regular conversation around the NFL draft. So this is early, but Andrew is ready. Andrew has made it all the way through where he feels comfortable beyond 25 players, coming up with his top 25 players in this upcoming class. I'm a little behind Andrew, but I'm getting there. But I'm really, really excited to go through this list because there are a few guys on this list that I haven't watched beyond casual Saturday, game watching. And I'm excited to learn more about this class that is becoming more and more intriguing as we get closer and closer to draft season. So Andrew, without any further ado, let's get into this top 25 list.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned we normally are actually much further behind the process of where we are this year. You say you're behind, but actually, if we flipped the page back a year or 2 years or 3 years, we're way ahead of where we would have been there. I started looking at prospects in August and September this year. Normally, December, January is when I really kick up the spreadsheet and start looking at the top of the line prospects. I'm already so far into this that I have way more than 25 players graded. Those are not their final grades. They continue to evolve and change, not on a weekly basis yet, but pretty soon we're going to get there, and final grades probably settled around January, February after the college football playoff is over. And then we start making adjustments based on some of the all-star circuit. But I feel really good with where I'm at right now. Things will change a little bit, but not egregiously. So it's fun. I love being where we are at, and I really want to hear your thoughts on some of these players as well. So to get things kicked off, the number one overall player in my class so far, and this is all position adjusted. So we're boosting quarterbacks and players at really high value positions, maybe pushing some of the players at lesser value positions down a little bit. But my number one overall player is cornerback Will Johnson out of Michigan. Number two is corner / wide receiver / skill player Travis Hunter out of Colorado. And number three is quarterback Cam Ward out of Miami. 4 is quarterback Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. And the 5th overall player is defensive lineman Mason Graham out of Michigan.
So this is an interesting group at the top because we will not be super consensus as we work through this entire exercise. I know Andrew well enough to know that, but this is a relatively consensus top of the board. And I was going to ask
Yeah.
you if these guys are position adjusted, because getting those quarterbacks that high in this class would suggest that they probably are. But I think we're in a place where maybe the quarterback class is a little bit better than we thought that it would be just a couple of months ago, with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders really playing well as of recently. So an interesting group here at the top. An interesting note here for me is just that I am a Fairweather Michigan fan. And so what I do is I tend to think that the players that Michigan fans hype up a lot are typically not as good as what the fans say they are, just because like, you kind of live in your bubble, right? And so coming into the season, Will Johnson was on that list for me. That I'm like, this is a good player. I don't think that this is a top 10 pick kind of a player, like, right? Like this is a first round pick, but like, these kinds of things. Same things with Mason Graham. Mason Graham's been a great player for Michigan for a long time, but the legend kind of has grown, but he's this like run stuffing monster in the middle. But these guys have had fantastic seasons, and it's one of those things where like I've had to come back to the tape and be like, these guys really are worthy of the buzz that's around them in this class. And so it's fun to see those guys at the top of your list. And I've just recently got into Mason Graham beyond just casual fandom this week. And this is a player that I think is going to be a treat for whatever NFL team gets him. Just a fantastic motor, incredible hands, really fun background with a lot of things like wrestling background and like dual sport thing. So lots to like at the top of this board, with a couple Michigan players that you sprinkled in there.
Absolutely. So that's a pretty chalk top 5. I think you'll see a lot of different orders depending on how much somebody likes a player, like let's say Will Johnson. But I think you're going to see those 5 players in most people's top 10s. Where things get a little bit different are going to be players 6 through 10. At number 6, I have quarterback Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. A lot of people probably don't even have Milroe in their top 25 at all right now. I do have a little hesitation that he may not declare this year. I just love the trait so much that I think some offensive coordinator, head coach is going to fall in love with this guy. Maybe it's not in the 25 cycle, but I do think he's a really, really top-notch player, even if he has not put everything together yet. Number 7 is a new name to the list. Defensive lineman Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. Number 8, safety Malachi Starks out of Georgia. Number 9, running back Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. And then at number 10, I have offense tackle Will Campbell out of LSU.
Yeah, so an interesting list here. You mentioned the Jalen Milroe thing, and that will be fascinating to see what the decisions are. What we mentioned that like we're a little bit ahead in our process, and what's funny is like in a lot of cycles, like we would just wait for these declarations before digging into these players, but we're early, and so like we're watching players like, okay, I hope this guy declares, or you're putting him in the spreadsheet for next year and moving some of those notes down the road. But he is a player that's going to be fascinating to see how NFL teams evaluate the upside relative to what is currently maybe on the field at this point in his career. Shamar Stewart is a player that I starred because I haven't watched him yet. I've seen a little bit, but I'm excited to get in because I see him as high as number 7 on your list here. We talked a little bit in other episodes about Malachi Starks just being probably the next great safety to come out of Georgia. And then Ashton Jeanty is just a force as a running back. So he's one you can't be an NFL draft fan and not have gotten into Jeanty just like because of the like fandom, right? But I haven't done the deep dive on him. So I'm excited to go compare where would I have him stacked against running backs in previous classes, because my heart says this guy is going to be near the top. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. You have him here 9. How high does the NFL take him? Could he be that next top 10 running back type of talent that the NFL just goes after? And then Will Campbell here. I think the interesting conversation is going to be what offensive tackle is offensive tackle 1. I think Kelvin Banks is the other name that you see around a lot for that spot. But Will Campbell has a lot of interesting traits that I think could put him up here near the top of the board.
Yeah, Shamar Stewart is really fun to me. He's a humongous guy, really long arms, but a like first step quickness that you just don't see in human beings his size. And that is going to make him an elite level prospect. I think of like DeForest Buckner when he was coming out of Oregon, and the 49ers took him really high. If you want a real throwback, Calais Campbell coming out, like he is that level of human being / athlete that you just can't find. And he has a little bit more refinement than I anticipated seeing. I thought maybe he's just like another big athletic guy. But there's some nuance to his game that I really, really like. And yeah, we've talked about Starks a lot. I think GT is going to be really interesting because in a class that you don't feel like goes super deep, like first round talent kind of starts to dry up a little around that 11-12 mark. Where is he going to go? And, is he the Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley level player that gets drafted in the top 10? And Will Campbell is really interesting to me because, like, to me, he kind of screams guard, but I want to try players at tackle first.
Yeah.
And so that's why I still have him labeled as tackle, still have him graded really high. I think he deserves that benefit of a doubt till he proves that he can't play tackle. And then you have a really solid interior offensive line. So I think that's a nice pick. So transitioning over to 11 through 15, we have 2 edge rushers, Michael Williams out of Georgia, and then James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. 2 cornerbacks, Siobhan Revel Jr. out of East Carolina, and then Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, and then tight end Colson Loveland, another Michigan product.
I love the Colson Loveland love here as high as 15. I think we've had a lot of really talented tight end classes the last couple of years. And I don't expect that we'll have the depth in this class that we have in the last couple of years, but Loveland is a really nice prospect. I think we'll be seeing in mock drafts sneaking into the first round probably on a regular basis. Andrew, I'm curious here, the 2 corners, because it feels like that this is shaping up to be a pretty good cornerback class with maybe some disappointments in some other positions, but corner looks pretty strong. Siobhan Revel is not a player that I have watched a lot at East Carolina, just by virtue of he's not on my screen a lot on a Saturday. And then Benjamin Morrison, one of these guys, you've got them back to back, 13, 14. Is there one here that jumps out to you? And is there a reason maybe you have Revel a little higher?
Really polar opposite players, and actually both are hurt. So we're probably not going to get testing for either one of these guys. But Revel is like that big, long, athletic freak. Think Sauce Gardner.
Okay.
He is that like prototypical modern day corner, like 6'2", really rangy, long arms. Like he plays the ball well. He's the kind of guy that I think teams with aggressive defensive coordinators are going to love. Benjamin Morrison is a technician. He was never going to blow you away anyways. And coming off a knee injury, like you always are a little concerned with corners, like because if you have just sufficient athleticism and you lose any part of that, suddenly it's a problem. But he plays so much faster than he would ever test. And he's just like, he's the most smooth. He understands route concepts. He does everything as it should be taught on tape. And I really, really love that about players. I don't know how high he's going to go, especially given that we likely won't get the testing numbers that would have proven whether or not he can really hang. But I love what I saw on tape out of him. So I think this corner class is great. I'm excited about that, especially rooting for a team that has a need at corner.
Yes.
I think there's going to be a lot of options in this class. So, good players. Injuries are unfortunate in the draft process, but I think, both will find their way being called on night 1 of the draft.
Absolutely. And it's fun. Like I'm a sucker for the technician at corner, and I've seen a good bit of Benjamin Morrison. Need to get into him a little bit more, but that 5'11", 6-foot corner that is twitched up, and your technician, that's the kind of guy that is easy to fall for. But interesting contrast there, and fun to hear that there is some depth in the corner class. Let's jump into 16 through 20 here on your list.
Yeah, so at 16, I have interior offensive lineman Tyler Booker out of Alabama. 17 is defensive lineman Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. At 18, edge Jalen Walker out of Georgia. 19, cornerback Jabbar Muhammad out of Oregon. And then at 20, wide receiver Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State.
All right. So again, more Michigan players, easy to talk about. But Kenneth Grant is fun because obviously we do a lot of talking about Mason Graham, and for good reason. But Kenneth Grant, I mentioned on another podcast, there's a lot of people, respectable people in the draft industry who actually have these guys right next to each other, and that there isn't this crazy discrepancy between the two. So you've got Mason Graham at 5, you've got Kenneth Grant down at 17. But having two defenders like this that could come off the board this close together obviously is a testament to what talent Michigan has been able to assemble there in Ann Arbor over the last couple of years. And then Emeka Egbuka is a player that I've really liked for a few years. Thought he was going to come out last year. And this is a player that, like last year, I thought he's probably not a 1 in an offense, but he can be a really, really valuable 2 that can step in and be someone you can funnel the ball to consistently, give him a ton of targets early on in his NFL career. Just really, really smooth, really, really refined route runner. And I think he's going to find a role in the NFL really, really fast. I am curious how high he's going to go, but I totally buy him being top 20 in this class as far as value, what we know right now.
Yeah, and I have him tied as my wide receiver 1. Player 21 is my other tied for wide receiver 1. And that's probably a little controversial. I think he's super polished. I think he's a pro-ready guy. I think he's going to test faster than people are giving him credit for, because we see that out of Ohio State receivers. We think that they're good athletes, and they turn out to be great athletes. And I think he's been coached really well. I love his hands. I love his route running. I think he's a polished kind of player. Maybe think a Jordan Addison sort of guy that can step in and be like an elite number 2 or a decent number 1 if you really need him to be that. But I think that fits in really well in this range of the draft as well.
All right, so you teased it with saying that you have a wide receiver that backs up here. Let's jump into this next set here, and let's talk about Mr. McMillan here.
Yeah, so Tetairoa McMillan, the guy that most people have as wide receiver 1, I have tied for wide receiver 1, but at my 21st overall player, he's the wide receiver out of Arizona. Number 22 is defensive lineman Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. And number 23, cornerback Denzel Burke out of Ohio State. 24, wide receiver Isaiah Bond out of Texas. And then 25, the aforementioned offensive tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. out of LSU.
Yeah, so again, we've got Denzel Burke, another really talented corner going in this first round. What would be a first round range? This is just going to be a really rich, talented group of defensive backs, I think, when we get to this draft. But Kelvin Banks, again, that's going to be fascinating because let's say if Will Campbell is not an offensive tackle, this would be your offensive tackle 1. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think Campbell ends up getting drafted at tackle, whether or not he sticks there. Yeah, Kelvin Banks, I think Urante Ursuri out of Minnesota, I have actually with a pretty much identical grade to Banks. I think Emory Jones, the other tackle at LSU, is right behind them. There's a guy who I can never pronounce the last name of, Jonah S. out of Arizona, who's really close in my rankings, Cameron Williams, who's more of a right tackle out of Texas. I think any one of those players has the potential to get pushed up. And I think we'll see 1 or 2 of them ascend as we get into draft season. Maybe that is Campbell. Maybe he ascends to a top 5 player, but I think there's a little bit of separation between him and Banks in my mind. And if Campbell is more of like that dominating guard, then maybe Banks is OT1 and gets drafted a little bit higher than Campbell does.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating just because I think last year's offensive tackle class was pretty stacked. And so then early returns was just that obviously Will Campbell, really talented player, might have some positional discrepancy of where he's going to end up in the league. And then someone like Kelvin Banks being your 25th player, maybe there's just not this elite tier of guys coming out that there was last year at that position. Isaiah Bond, we talk about the wide receiver group here, Emeka Egbuka, McMillan, and then Bond here sneaking in just behind them. Obviously, they're stacked really closely together. How would you, obviously you stack them in that order, But what do you see in Bond that has him cracking the top 25 here?
You know how every year you're like, hey, there's a wide receiver that I watch that you're going to love?
Yes. Is this Jalen Hyatt?
Yeah. Well, I think he's a better version of that.
Okay. All right.
But yes, he is the burner. So
Okay.
in the way that I fell in love with kind of the B- version of Isaiah Bond in Jalen Hyatt and Troy Franklin.
Yes, Troy Franklin,
This is a guy who's a burner, but he also has a lot of quick twitch. I think having played at both Alabama and now Texas, he is a much more refined player than either of those two were. I think he's got a little bit of a route tree already. And I think he's a better catcher. So I think he's going to be able to more easily plug in. But yeah, just an electric player who could be really, really dynamic with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, no, that's really, really fun. I just think it's going to be interesting to watch. Some of these position groups kind of stack up as we get into the process. We talked about the offensive tackles, the wide receivers, just very different groups than last year. The strengths of this class probably being in corner, obviously a really deep running back class. We only talked about Gene T today, but there's going to be a lot of depth there at running back as well. So a little bit of a difference from what we saw last year as far as what the strengths of the draft class are going to be. But it's going to be really fun to continue in this conversation, get a little bit deeper into this every time as we have now made it through your top 25 list. But if you're listening to the audio version of this, make sure you check out the video because Andrew does have those top 25 going up 5 at a time on the screen, and it's easy to see maybe some of the players that we didn't get to talk about today. So check out that YouTube version of the show as well. But thanks for joining us on the show today. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. But from the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have got you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.
Kyle got the insight, Andrew brings the heat. Breaking down the roster every single week. Catch us on the podcast, we coming through your speakers. Top picks for practice squad, we got the seekers. Team dynamics, contracts, and the trades. From the draft day excitement to the accolades. Draft fellows on the track, we gone strong. Analyze the plays, we can't be wrong. From the 40-yard dash to the longest throw. We talking pro ball, yeah, you know.